All right, bear with me, folks. This one's going to be a kind of theoretical venture and maybe not interesting to anyone, maybe interesting to some people, but I think it can build up a kind of interesting framework. So, obviously, with the various bots, we have figured out kind of things they can value that get them to play reasonable, sometimes good, sometimes poor, but play different ways, right? The first obvious step was to tell them to capture a lot. And we have the two capture bots that value capturing more than anything else. Those bots are Jack, Club, and also Magician for a closed bot. So there are three of the standard eight bots. Their top value is they do the thing that does the most captures, which means against a lot of new players, they're going to have an advantage because the new player will often also only play captures, but the bot will reliably find the combo that captures the most stuff, and that often is going to end up with an advantage against someone who is finding captures but not seeing the plus walls, not seeing the combos, right? Then we have Queen, who starts to value safety, right? If Queen sees, oh, you can't take this card, Queen will, play this move. Now here they can, but pretend they couldn't. There's no safe move here, so I don't have a good example. And Queen is stronger than those bots. Now this also, in some ways, means Queen can do some less testing moves. There's certainly players I notice who I think have an easier time with Queen than they do with capture bots, but I would describe that as a stylistic thing, and it is obvious over time that both if Queen plays the captures bots, Queen is Queen is a real advantage, and Queen is a better win percentage against the community. Now, the next four bots that regularly go up, though they have serious differences between them, the next three bots, Diamond, well, four, yeah, Diamond, Deuce, Joker, and Spade, all both check how much safety they can earn and try to deny you safety, right? They're both finding safety for themselves, but they're also seeing opportunities to deny you safety. So, for instance, if someone went here and pretend this card was out of red's hand, blue might play 6-1-4-7 and 9 or something like that as a safe move next turn. So not only is 7-2-4-5, let's pretend it was safe in itself, it isn't because of 6-1-4-7, but not only could a move in 9 be safe in itself, but it would also deny the opponent's safety. So they would be much more likely, if it was safe again, to play here than to play here, where let's pretend there wasn't safety, or wasn't as much. There would be the same here. Ignore me. Now, they do different versions of this. Diamond has that understanding, but really likes to play weak corners. If Diamond had this hand for blue, they would start here, right? They love their weak corners. Spade likes strong corners. Otherwise, they are pretty similar. It turns out that liking strong corners is a significant advantage, and Spade is a clearly better player, though Diamond will certainly find better moves in some spots. But this is why I gave them kind of similar avatars, because they are quite similar. Deuce actually just doesn't care at all about safety for himself. All the others care about safety and denying you safety. Deuce only cares about denying you safety. Joker is a combination that doesn't care about what kind of corners it plays at all, and that leads to it being a more complex player, I think, than Diamond or Spade, but with probably basically equal, but probably slightly worse results over time than Spade. It turns out valuing strong corners is a good value to add to that. So, okay, we have a bunch of values, a bunch of things to think about. And what I want to do here is explore an alternate value, right? It's kind of similar to safety, but we're going to break it down a little more. I'm going to be calling it faces theory. And we're going to start with a move that was played in the game with these hands. This is a game between Seto and Midas. There's a video of it if you want to check out the game. What actually happened there, not super relevant to us. But this was Seto's starter, and I was looking for the most recent, as of when I record this, chat tournament game or weekly open game where a half strong corner was played, because I wanted to use a half strong corner as an example. So this is a card that both players have easy access to from 6, but only blue can capture from 8. So from red's perspective, this is a corner we have covered one way, but not the other. We have one face covered. I'm going to use the term face, rather than side or direction or, whatever else. We have one face covered and not the other. And I've come up with a very simple scoring system for this. Uh, and we're going to say all positive scores mean favoring first turn, all negative scores favor second turn. So, if I say, yes, we got -3, you might think -3 sounds terrible. But if we're looking from second turn's perspective, -3 is fantastic. So, for each card that is played, it has some number of faces facing out, right? Any corner card or any corner card on an empty board has two faces facing out at the start of the game. For what it's worth, we're only going to care about how many faces out it has at the moment it is played. So, for instance, if something was stuck in 8 and you then played in 9, this would only count as having one face, right? It only faces towards 5. That's going to be important to how we count this. Okay, so it is two faces out. One face is unsafe. For each face that is unsafe, point goes to the other player. Again, this is going to seem weird and arbitrary, but I think it's going to get us to an interesting place. So the one facing out, that's -1. That's a point for second turn. The 7 facing out is safe. Each face that is safe gives a point to the player doing it. That's first turn, so that's +1. So the net score of this starter is 0. Now, it should be noted, that doesn't mean if we compare to something like this would have 2 unsafe faces, that would be -2, right? Unless you have a totally safe starter to start with, which is pretty rare, you're going to have a score of 0 or worse on the starter. That doesn't mean that starter is bad or it's second turn favored. This is a comparative metric, right? It is comparing between the options you have, not giving some absolute evaluation of the position. Now, I think 1167 and 7 would have been a perfectly reasonable move here, and I mostly want to focus on this as a method of evaluating moves on move 2 and move 3 rather than on move 1. I'm not sure it holds up as well on move 1. So we're going to be focusing on second turn's reply here. But the evaluation of this move is 0, right? This is the current position we evaluate as 0. Now, if we put another move on the board, let's put the move that was actually played, right? 4, 4, 5, 7, and 1. Now, this does not change the evaluation of the starter, right? Red can still capture from 6. Red still cannot capture from 8. That's still worth 0. Now, can blue capture this card? Blue can capture from both sides. This is unsafe both ways. Both faces are unsafe. This is -2 to the player playing it. That's second turn, so it's +2. So now the position evaluates as +2, right? By playing an opposite corner, and red has lots of ways to play in the opposite corner, these would all basically pick up scores of +2, right? They're all stuff that blue can capture. Red now has only one thing that attacks, one face they have attacking on blue's card, while blue has 2 faces they're attacking on red's card. That doesn't mean this is a terrible move or an unviable plan, but any move here in this situation leads to a +2 position, leads to something that, when we start looking at comparative choices, I think we'll come out with, the cat sneezing right behind me, hopefully you can't hear that, comes out with, some kind of first turn advantage. And I believe the game went here, here. Seto cleverly realizes that if you combo, he combos back. Midas actually correctly found the only square that ties. There's only one move that ties here, but not the right card. I don't remember what the right card actually was. He goes here, and now Seto has 1575 to sweep the top, and 3664 to basically sweep the bottom, and this is a win, and I think a very nicely played game by Seto. I really enjoyed this game when I saw it. But this is going to be our baseline, right? If we throw something in the opposite corner, could be this card, could be another card, that's going to score +2. First turn, it's going to be +2. Let's look at the other corners, because now we should be ready to evaluate other corners. And we should note, it depends on having recaptures, right? If we played something like here, now first of all, blue can capture this both ways. But second of all, we don't have the capture from 2. And any card where we don't have recaptures, and they can capture it the other way that forces us to have those recaptures, this method is not going to be able to score properly, and we should just kind of throw out if we're following this method. Specifically, if we move one move ahead here, a few things happen. One is blue has all three cards. We'll get to how to evaluate a scoring advantage shortly, but blue has all three cards. The card in 9 had two faces initially, so they get +2 for the card in 9 because you can't take either. When they played in 6, they made the face facing up safe, but you still get credit for that. You get credit for the number of faces based on what the initial out facing of that card was. So the card in 9 is +2 for first turn. The card in 3 initially had two out faces, so it has up to 2 points. The one facing down wasn't safe, but now is because that square is blocked. The one facing left is safe on its own. That's another +2, +4. That card in 6 only had one side facing out when it was first played, only gets 1 point, +5. This is +5 for first turn, and they're up a card. I don't want to get into why yet, but being up a card, being up 6-4, is also worth another +1. 7-3 would be +2, 8-2 would be +3. So it's +6 here for first turn, and unsurprisingly, this is a great position for first turn, right? I think this is just a win, right? I don't understand what's supposed to happen. There's actually a variation that's kind of funny where if here, I put a puzzle of this up. This move freakishly happens to win. There's nothing you can put in 2 that doesn't get comboed through 5, and 2 is a huge threat because 2 now combos 3, 6, 9. And so this actually somehow wins for second turn, but obviously this is a very strange and freaky circumstance, and not one, no one's playing this move being like, yes, if they combo me, they've fallen for my trap and I win on the spot. Also, this is the first position I've ever checked with the solver, I think, with 6 moves left, where of the 24 possible moves, 23 lose, and the other one wins. Normally, if there's like one win, there's like at least a couple ties somewhere. And the only times you get one win and all the other moves losing is much later in the game. I've never seen it this early. One win, 23 losses. What a curious position. Okay, but back to our main issue. So something like this is a disaster, and it's easy to start counting up the score and seeing it's a disaster. And if counting up the score sounds clunky and slow, you get faster at it as you do it more. And also, I should say, what we want out of this scoring system, and what I think it will offer, I think this scoring system has some insight into which kinds of moves we should prefer over others. And I think what it has to say there, you could figure out lots of other ways, but I think it comes to quite an interesting answer there. And the sort of goal of something like this is not to like be looking at the position and being like, okay, that's +1, that's -1. Okay, if I go here, that's +1, that's -1. Instead, it's to say, okay, against this type of starter, we can have checked all the kind of moves in advance in another game and have a sense of, okay, this option is really appealing if this, and that's our top option. If that option works, great. This option only works in these specific circumstances. And I think you could come up with a kind of pretty effective priority list of, okay, we saw a half-strong starter, right? The starter we're looking at here is half-strong. How are we going to deal with it? This method comes out with, there are a few move types that are clearly preferable to others. And if you check for moves in kind of that preferential order, it will help clarify and direct you towards better moves more often. So that's sort of the idea of this new theory. I also want to introduce how to describe a move, because I was writing this out and sending this in messages to my my confidant on stuff like this, and it was a pain to type out like fully safe, totally unsafe, half safe every time. So what I think I want to say to describe a card quickly, at least in writing, it makes it much easier to get this down, is to describe this starter in 9 as 1F1. I was thinking about calling it 1F2, but I think we're going to call it 1F1. So the first number is, the middle word is faces, right? It's just telling you that the thing that's being talked about is the faces of a card. The first one is how many faces of the card are safe, and the second is how many faces of the card are unsafe. And I was initially thinking it should be 1f2. The first number is how many of the sides are safe, and the second number is how many faces are there in total. So it would be 1 out of 2 is safe. And that would immediately tell you, if you saw 1f2, that's a corner. If you saw 1f3 or 0f3, that's a side, right? If you saw something f4, that's a center. And it would immediately be very intuitively obvious what kind of card was being talked about, where it was being played. On the other hand, the thing I like about 1f1 to describe a move like this, and the reason I want to stick with that, is because the math is, right, safe faces minus unsafe faces, basically. And 1f1 makes that very obvious. 1 minus 1 equals 0. Any 1f1 is obviously going to score 0. Any card that's fully safe, 2f0, is going to obviously be +2 for the player playing it, right? The math is really simple. You never need to turn on your brain. 0f2, that's -2, right? Here's a 0f2 move, right? 0 sides safe, 2 sides unsafe. Okay. So I want to get into like the other options. We've seen if we go in the far corner, this is going to be a +2 for first turn. This is not a happy result for second turn. Now, if one side was safe, then this would be a 1f1. It would score 0, right? And the position would be 0. This would be much more this would be vastly preferable to the previous. However, blue can take it and we can't take back. And when we don't have recaptures here, obviously we have to throw out the whole 1f1 thing. It relies on recaptures. But if this was a recapturable card, this would suddenly be a 0 scoring move because it's half safe. One thing to watch out for with opposite corners, especially when they are partially safe, is sometimes they give up the needed power to take the card they're opposite from. For instance, if this had been the starter and this was played, sure, it would be half safe, pretend we can recapture, but it would also turn their card fully safe, right? We'd no longer have any captures on Zagnol, the 6147. So we would play a 1f1 for a 0 score, but we would turn their 1f1 into a 2f0. Is this way of describing things kind of stupid sounding? Probably, but it's a lot quicker than listing out what I'm saying every time. So I want to try to get at least a little used to it in this video. I don't think I'm going to be talking like this in the future, but I do think it's an interesting framework. So against this move, this could potentially lead to a 0 position, right? Both cards are 1f1. In this case, we don't have to recapture, but pretend we did. However, against this move, this position would, turn their 1f1 into a 2f0, and this would be a +2 position, not nearly as appealing, right? And that's true, right? We don't want to be giving up our captures on their cards. That's a real cost there. This is obviously getting at something somewhat true. Okay. So I think that's it for opposite corners. Obviously, if an opposite corner was completely safe, then it would be a 2f0, and we could get a score of -2 here, right? So the value of the opposite corner depends heavily on how much challenge it creates for the opponent. And in general, if we have safe things to do, this system will rate those moves very, very highly, and we don't need to go much further. So what we're going to really be trying to do here is look at which moves are best when we don't have safety, right? When we have safety, this system will say the safe move is really good, and that's the preferable option, right? And those situations, though, are not situations that are particularly hard to play. There's certainly things that say, I have safety, I'm going to keep that available for later. I've talked in the past, I think Delhi is really good at that kind of move. There's stuff in that direction, but it is to say those positions, like even the times when the best move is actually to keep that card for later, if you play that card, you still usually have a really good situation, and like you've gotten out of the opening of the game very happily. So I'm just going to say we're going to, generally speaking, be assuming either half safety or unsafe cards rather than full safety, because full safety makes the calculus really straightforward and obvious. Okay, next where I want to consider is the other corners. And if we look at this corner, we see it doesn't change our interaction with their corner. That's still a 1F1. And our card is basically always going to be a 0F2, right? Our card is always going to be capturable both ways by them, unless we don't have the recaptures, right? If we do something like this, we can't recapture it. It does have a side that's safe, but we can't recapture anyway, so it doesn't matter. This one, kind of similarly, does have a side that's safe, but also we again cannot recapture it, right? They could do something like this, and it's lost to us. Okay, so 3 is really, I think, unappealing here. Um, both because we don't have good cards to put there, but also because anything we put there, when they go in 6, 9 becomes completely safe, right? They just saved one side, it becomes 2F0, it's +2. 6 is totally safe, it only ever had one outfacing side, so 1F0, that's +1 more. They're going to be at least at +3, and they flipped an extra card, which is worth a point, so they're at +4, right? So anything like this is going to be, and that card happens to be safe the other way, so +5. And that would be true of any card in our hand, that it is safe to 2 against us. So huge advantage for first turn. Actually, +6 is the correct evaluation here if you add everything up. So, okay. 3 is really bad, in part because it gives up such a straightforward, powerful option. What about the last corner, though? Well, the last corner is the most interesting corner and the most appealing corner because it is the only corner that can change the evaluation of their card in a way that favors us. For instance, if we play 6, 4, 5, 4, and 7, their card in 9 is no longer safe either way, right? We have changed the evaluation of their 1F1 to a 0F2. Both its faces are unsafe because we now have a plus with either 7, 2, 4, 5 or 4, 4, 5, 7 in 8. And so their card suddenly becomes -2. Now, our card, our opponent can take both ways, so that's +2. But we've kept the evaluation of this position at 0, and as we've seen from the other corners, that's quite hard to do. We got a score of 0 here when we were getting +2s at best before. We're trying to get a minus score because we're the second turn player. We got a score of 0, and we didn't even need any safety to do it, right? The other moves could have gotten there if they were partially or fully safe. But here, we can get there without needing that safety. Note this move also sets up 8 and also does so. And one thing I want to note here is all those moves in 3 we said look terrible. I think every move in 3 is losing. In this position, there are 40 moves. I don't have it up in front of me, but about a third of them lose and 2/3 tie with perfect play. That doesn't mean they tie easily. This was a good starter. But 5 of the 13 moves that lose are in 3. There's another move or 2 that loses in 1. 7 has 2 losses, but all 3 of the moves that set up 8, right? There are 3 moves that set up 8. They're all ties. The moves that don't set up 8, well, at least this one, loses. This one is actually a little more interesting to evaluate. It doesn't set up 8. It is half safe, but we don't have the recapture. By our framework, this is pretty terrible. This one actually does happen to tie, but obviously by our framework, it's going to look bad, and it's a pretty sketchy way to tie. And I'm not saying these moves necessarily lead to easy ties. Our hand is pretty bad. It's really bad going to the right, and their starter directed the game to the right. This is not an easy starter to meet. I like this starter a lot from Seto. But I think it's telling that the 3 most comfortable ties we found are the 3 moves in the corners that the system would clearly identify. And I think this leads to the first kind of clear pattern. Against a half-strong corner, which is what we're looking at today, one of the really appealing options is to go in the adjacent corner against the strong side, right? The strong side's the 7, the strong face, that faces towards 8. If we can play an adjacent corner that sets us up in 8, even without any safety of ours or anything set up for us except 8, that's going to be a more appealing move than anything in 1 or 3, the adjacent corner against the weak side or the far corner, unless those moves have safety or partial safety, right? That this move in 7 is innately a better square for us setting up 8 than a move in 1 or 3 would be. That they need a lot more to be going right to be as good as the move in 7. And this means as a player who has limited time to figure stuff out and who has to make, quick decisions and is going to has only so much time to spend looking at different squares, we should be spending a lot more of our focus looking at 7 than looking at 1 or 3. Okay, there are some other squares to look at. How do we feel about 2 and 4? 2 and 4 are kind of curious squares to discuss, right? They're going to have 3 sides out facing. They're not going to interact with the opponent's starter, so that's still going to be a 0, +1, -1 for each of the 2 faces. So if we go in 2 or 4, I think the main problem and the reason it's not really evaluatable for us by this metric is anything we put in 2, we cannot retake from 1. Now, that means we can retake it against any capture, because we can recapture most cards there against either 3 or 5. But note something like this, we do not have guaranteed recaptures, because we cannot recapture in either 1 or 5. It breaks down, this is a terrible move, this is in fact a losing move, and indeed making sure we have at least 1 recapture against any take says, yeah, this is bad. 4 is in some ways more appealing, because at least we know we have, a set of recaptures, right? You play something like this in 4, you can recapture it all 3 ways. But, so at least we can count it. But when we do count it, we see it has 0 faces that are safe, 3 that are dangerous, 0 F3. That's 3 points to the other side, so this is a +3 evaluation. It thinks these kinds of moves are some of the worst moves we've seen. I think that's not quite right. I think the moves in 3 were worse. But we can quickly realize the moves 3 are worse once we see they have this kind of option. And looking with this kind of faces system, we will see they have this kind of option. And after 6, a little less obvious they can do something quite as devastating to us. After 4. So what I would say about these moves is, if they had even 1 safety, right, then it would be a 1F2. That's only +1 for the opponent. +1 for the opponent is pretty good on a reply to this. We've seen some final scores of 0, but a final score of +1, pretend this was comfortably recapturable for us. Or they can capture that, so I guess that's not a good example. We really don't have something that has any kind of partial safety. I guess this is the only one that does. But a move like this actually scores okay by this system, right? And actually, it doesn't look that terrible. If they ever need to take it from 7, they can't. There's the partial safety. We have recaptures in all 3 squares if we want it. We cover squares like 1 and 7. They don't have obvious safety in reply. Maybe it's really bad for us if they go 6. I guess they do have obvious tons of safety in reply. But, it's easy to see that from this system, right? They've turned the 1F1 and 9 into a 2F0. Now both its faces are safe. And they've played another 2F0 and 6. So they have 2 completely safe things with 2 outfacing sides. Again, your number of outfacing sides is how many you faced when you were played. So 1167 still gets credit for both sides, and 6147, despite technically facing 3 squares, gets credit for the 2 it's facing since it was played. And this looks very scary, because we're fighting 2 cards we can't do much about. But my point on far sides is, if they're easily recapturable, they don't use up power we need, and one of their sides the opponent cannot deal with, this system doesn't score them so badly. You do need some kind of way they create a problem for the opponent, by this system at least, but looking there is not an outrageous thing. This is a system that says, this is not really an appealing option, but if nothing does appeal, it's not so bad. Okay. We have, how many squares left? We have 5, 6, and 8. Let's talk about 8. Anything we play in 8 fundamentally doesn't change the math on their card in 9, right? They had a side that was safe. That side is still safe. It's now blocked by our card. They had a side that was weak. That side is still weak. So it's still a 1F1. So the evaluation of this move is entirely on the basis of what our card was. Our card is safe neither way, so this ends up being +2 for first turn. This is not a particularly appealing move, but it is to say, if you see a strong card, we shouldn't feel that unhappy about blocking the square it's strong to, right? Like, it's strong there anyway, and if you have something useful to do there, you can just do it. And it's not going to be any more damaging than going, in a square like this or a square like this. Okay, so we've looked at 6 of the 8 squares now, and the most appealing options by far were in 7. Which to do next? Let's do 5. Now, the first thing to do with 5 is note, if 5 does not set us up, specifically if it does not give us 8, then their card in 9 is still 1f1, so that's even score, and our card in 5 is potentially vulnerable up to 4 times. In this case, it is. So this would be 4 points for first turn. It thinks a move here that does not set you up at all, and they can take this many ways, is just a disaster. And I think maybe it's overstating the damage of them being able to take so many ways, but that also speaks to how much potential options and ideas they'll have against a move like this. It turns out that any move here in 5 that does not set up 8 is a losing move. There is some truth here to these evaluations. It thinks a move like this is horrendous, and I think there are specific circumstances. I've talked about the Akiyama center play that I think this would not be impressed by, but I think is actually a very reasonable way of playing. But I never claimed this, theory system, faces theory thing was going to be a perfect encapsulation of all positions. There are certainly strategies it's going to miss. That's definitely one of them. But most of the time, it's kind of got the right idea. Okay, so what if we do set up 8? How could we do so? Well, a 7 down would do so, because 4, 4, 5, 7 now has 8. And I think there's another way to do so. A 5 down sets up 6, 4, 4, 5. So there are 2 cards we could put in 5 that set up 8. Now, this card happens to have safety facing towards 4. Of course, we don't have the recapture in 4 either, so we might not count that. But let's pretend this was completely unsafe. Maybe the other one will be. Again, we don't really have the capture. But again, also not completely unsafe. They don't have a capture in 8. So I don't really have a good way to show this, but pretend this was totally unsafe. And it sets us up in 8. So their 1f1 and 9 becomes a 0f2. It's fully unsafe, so that's 2 points to us. And our card in 4 is fully unsafe. That's 4 points to them, but it might be overstating how dangerous it is to have a fully unsafe thing in 5. That might not be that big a deal. But even if it is, that's 2 points to us, 4 to them. This is only +2 for first turn, right? This is only we've seen lots of moves that were +2 for first turn. So if we set up 8 and have no safety coming off our card in 5, it's still coming out as, middle of the pack move. If we do have safety in any direction, and we do have safety in a direction here, and we can recapture against any capture, we don't have the recapture in 4, but at least in the current state, we don't need it. Then you get, this is, instead of being 0f4, this is 1f3. That's only 2 points for the other side. We have 2 points off their starter. It already comes out as a 0 move. So 5, if it sets up against the strong side we can't take, and creates some potential challenge for our opponent down the road, is the only thing coming out as appealing as setups in 7. Now, setups in 7 should still be our priority here, because we got to a 0 score, which is very good for us, even though we didn't have any safety on it, and we have some safety requirements for moves in other squares. Now, you might say I've spent 35 minutes to get to the very simple point of when they play a starter that has a side we can't take, often the most appealing option is simply to set up against that side. And I think that is mostly what we've said here, right? I think I have spent a whole lot of time to get to that point, but I think it's a nice framework to think about it, and I hope this is interesting to someone. And specifically that 7 doesn't need additional help. 5 is a little inherently shakier, and anything else needs a bunch of help. It needs some explicit challenge to the opponent. 7 is the only move that said that you can play saying you can take this both ways. I create no threat to like make something you can't take, and I'm still happy with this move. Anything else, you kind of need something extra going on. So the adjacent corner against the strong side should, by this framework at least, be our top priority response to a half-strong starter like this. Our second most likely move to be good is a setup in 5. And I think this is good practice for the order we should look at moves. After that happens, the other moves are kind of similar in value. You know, if you happen to have more safety in 8 or more safety in 1, it's fine either way. 3 is a little specifically dangerous, and I would really avoid 3 particularly because they're given such an easy way to lock in the unsafe side and keep the safe side pointing out, because this is such an easy path. So I would kind of, and there are examples of this being done really well, but I would kind of only look at 3 if, for instance, they don't have something in 6 that's safe, and also I have a really good recapture in 2 that I'm really happy about, or if they go in 6, I have a really good capture in 5, right? But I need a bunch of stuff to be going right for the kind of adjacent corner against the weak side to work. There are times that is the case. Reye had a great tie against me in a fairly recent weekly open and then went on to beat me in the next game. But I think the more impressive, 2 very nicely played games by him, was holding a tie with a really bad hand with a move kind of analogous to this. But on the whole, it is accepting a major disadvantage, and you need a lot else to be going right. And obviously, with these hands, red is terrible going to the right, so all that other stuff is not going to be going right. Actually, there is another interesting finding here on adjacent corners that we'll get to at the end, because we have 1 square left to do, and that is 6. Say you capture in 6. Maybe we capture with something that can't be comboed back. So a 6 up can be comboed back, a 7 up can be comboed back, a 4 up can be comboed back. No, a 6 up cannot be comboed. So either this or this are 2 ways to do it that avoid combos. Let's do it with the 6. How does this look to us? Well, we have a 6-4 lead, so that's a point in our favor. We're already at -1. Nice. However, the card in 9 has 1 safe face facing towards 6, that's blocked, and 1 unsafe face facing towards 8, so it switched colors, but it's still a 1F1, right? It still has 1 unsafe, the 7 facing out, and 1 safe, the 1 facing into another card. So that's net 0. And the card we just played can be taken both ways, so it is, in fact, a +2 position. We've seen a lot of +2 positions, but we're up 6-4, so here it's only +1. And so this is actually our third best generic option. Our best option, if we ignore all the safety stuff, is to go in 7. Setting up 8. 7 if it doesn't set up 8 is terrible. 7 if it sets up 8 is good. Though 7 if it doesn't set up 8 is still usually better than 3. For instance, if they do something like this, we still have ways to attack the cards. While if we do something like 3, we have very few ways to attack the cards, which happens to be why this one actually still ties, because if they set up this structure, we still have L's facing the weak side of the 1-1-6-7. Okay. But my point here is this scores +1. We had some moves that could get us to 0, but +1 is actually pretty good. And if this had partial safety or something like that, it could score even better and actually become quite appealing. So I think against a kind of half-strong starter like this, your standard options are adjacent corner that sets you up, center move that sets you up, or just capturing it. And I think as the primary 3 options, that's not a bad list. Other moves start being more appealing or as appealing if they have safety or partial safety. And so there's, certainly reasons to go in 1 or 3 or wherever. But I think a good kind of initial game plan here is, can I set up from an adjacent corner? If I can, I should spend time figuring out if I like that move, but that move is likely to be pretty reasonable. If I move on from there, I check the center. Can I set up in the center? If I can, I need a little more going on, but if I have just a little more in my favor, that's pretty reasonable. If that doesn't work, we move on to capturing. If I can capture, especially if it sticks out some numbers the opponent will have difficulty with, that is also very appealing. So you kind of you see a half-strong starter, and there's sort of 4 things to think about. Do I have safety somewhere? Now, hopefully, you checked while they were thinking about their starter where you might have potential safety. So this is something you shouldn't have to do on this turn. You should, for instance, pretend this card was safe. You should be aware this card would be safe coming in. It isn't safe, this wouldn't be a good move, but we should have that knowledge coming into the turn, and a move like that should be at the top of our priority list. So we've already thought about that, we're already aware if we have safety. Once our turn comes, we know we don't have safety, we see a half-strong corner, we go into, can I set up from the adjacent corner? I can, this looks reasonable, this is a good move. Can I set up from the center? I can, this looks reasonable, this is a good move. Can I just take it in a way they can't combo? Yeah, this is probably the next best option. And in the actual game, Midas, who's of course a very good player, plays in 1, which is, I think, often the fallback move of people who didn't find any way to interact that they like, and I think is actually a really good fallback there. I think this is kind of, if you don't find anything you like to interact with their starter, throwing something in the far corner that you want out of your hand and that you can deal with well is a very good strategy. Not one that our faces theory captures, but I think it is a good strategy. But also, I do think kind of all the moves we've listed. I think this, 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 and I think this, all actually, though Midas' move doesn't lose, I think all of these have an easier time directing the game to a tie. And I'm not using this as a video to make specific attacks on the player. We all have better and worse games. But I think it is a nice indicator for this method of thinking that it does indicate a whole bunch of moves that I think would have been better practical tries than something played by a very good player. All right, there was one other thing I wanted to get to, which is, let's change the starter up. Not sure I have a starter here that would be a good example of this. So maybe I'm trying to think of exactly how I want to frame this. Let's say starter was here, and that red went here. That this is locked in. This just happened. So you'll notice blue does not have a capture in 6 of the card in 3. So red doesn't need a recapture in 2. Blue can recapture in 2, but then red has recaptures in 6, right? So either blue doesn't capture and then red doesn't need to capture back, or blue does capture and red has the capture back. Okay. Let's think about dealing with adjacent corners and how it would be scored. So in this position, the current evaluation, if we go through the moves, is the card in 9 is 1F1, has safe facing 8, unsafe facing 6, net 0. 3276 is also 1F1. Safe facing 6, unsafe facing 2, that's 0. So we have a position that is a score of 0. Okay. And we're thinking about how to block 6. Now, our obvious way to do so is 1167. If we did so, 6147 becomes safe for us. So instead of being a 0 score card, it becomes, from 1F1, it becomes 2F0, so it's +2. And our card in 6 is +1. Now you might think it's worth just as much as the card in 9, But actually, this captures something because we are much more likely to have to defend that card. Say they go here, we probably have to block 5, right? That is the card they're going to be able to set up threats against. It is actually the card in 6 is correctly not valued as much as the card in 9. I think this is something in this system's favor, is that it correctly realizes we have two safe cards. They are not actually of equal value. One, we are very likely, even though it doesn't know the next moves, it correctly gets that one we are much more likely to have to defend, right? We might be forced to block 5 here. Blocking 5 is not really what we'd want to be doing in this spot. Now, it might work in exactly this position with the exact cards, but like, you get the idea. Um, so So I think it's correctly giving the card in 9 more credit than the card in 6. But either way, it is saying, we block 6. This is a +3 position, right? Our two cards on board get us to +3. Their card in 3, we are attacking. It is safe. It is in danger from 2. It is safe to 6 because 6 is blocked, so it's 1f1, so it's equal value. So the net score of this position is +3. Now, what if we could play 1, 1, 6, 7, and 6 and flip 3? Pretend they could flip it back, but not in a way that combos everything. But we could take it, flip 3. Well, if we flipped 3, it would still be 1f1, right? Because they'd be able to take it back and it would be safe facing the card we flipped it with. So it would be 0 value, it would be net neutral. But we'd be up 6-4. That does force the opponent's hand a bit. That is a useful thing to have. So this position we see as +3. If this flipped the card in 3, and they could flip back but not combo, it would go up to +4. So this is saying when we block 6, we want to play safely there. And if we can capture as well, that's nice. But it's not massively better. It's a little better, right? We like going up 6-4, but it's not that much better. Now let's think about being unsafe. How does being unsafe score? Say we played something like this. Well, 9 is made completely safe, so we get 2 points from that. The card in 3 is still 1f1, so it's still break even. We can basically, in all lines, that's going to be 1f1. So we're going to, just call that 0. And our card in 6, instead of being +1, is -1. So instead of this position being +3 or +4, it drops to +1. It is our clear least favorite option of the 4, right? And that makes sense. Safety is going to be better. But it is by a real margin. Now, pretend we played this move and flipped 3. It would be exactly the same, except we'd get a point for being up a card, so it would be +2. So we have safe and captures +4. Safe doesn't capture +3. Captures unsafe +2. Doesn't capture unsafe +1. And I think this is just the correct ranking on average. There are occasional times it'll differ of moves in this square, right? Safety is really important. Capturing is less important. But if you don't have safety, you really want to have that capture. Otherwise, you are often way behind. So if you don't have safety, and note our card in 9 is safe. There are going to be lots of versions of this where the card in 9 doesn't get safe, and the scores will be dramatically lower here. But I think this is a good kind of general rule of playing against the adjacent corners. Is the most desirable move is the in-between square safe and capturing. The second most desirable move is the in-between square safe non-capturing. The third most desirable move is not safe but does capture. And at the point you're there, we should be looking for other options. Usually the safe options, whether or not it captures, are going to be better or at least as good as all other options. But an unsafe move that doesn't capture is almost never the best option, and an unsafe move that does capture is often, there are other moves in other squares that are going to be as good. And I think, again, this system kind of gets at a a way that captures something that's kind of a true essence to the average of these positions. Is it going to be right about every single one? Of course not. But it gives us some game plans. And specifically today, we talked about this half-strong corner, the 1F1, and it says, yes, we have three moves that clearly seem a little better than the others by this system. First option, top option. Okay, so there are technically four options. So the first option is, do we have safety somewhere? If we do, that's going to be really appealing. Sure, great, whatever. Second option, and we've already checked for that on our opponent's turn, right? On our opponent's turn, we should have noticed what do they have in each direction. 7 to the left, we can't beat that. They have it multiple times. That's tough. We don't want to be going right because we can't beat the stuff they have going left. They have a 7 to the right. We have a 7 to the left, and with its 4s, we're pretty good at that. So we're probably okay if the game is going to the left. They have 6 going up. We have a 7 going down. 3, 2, 7, 6 is going to be a really important card. If the game is going down, that card will have good play. They can't stop it taking stuff. And them going down, they have a 7 going down. We have a 7 going up. We can take them in certain circumstances, not in others. That one's going to be a complex interaction. So we don't want the game to be going right. We're okay with it going left. We're okay with it going up. We quite like it going down. We really don't want it to go to the right. I know I said the right already, but that one's really important. We get that. We also check for safety in our hand, and we notice, we don't have any safety anywhere, but the numbers we already checked say maybe a 7 to the left could be safe, a 7 down could be partially safe, right? And we don't have too much else. So we've already checked for all that. Then their move comes. We know we don't have safety anywhere immediately. We know we don't want the game going to the right. And we have these 3 moves that the system has told us are valuable. We could go in 7, setting up 8, and I think those are some of the better moves here. We could go in 5, setting up 8. That needs a tiny bit more work. You need you need to look at that move and think something else is working there, but if it is, that's a good move. And if those don't work, just capturing it and kind of getting rid of this card that gives us trouble and moving on to the next cards that they have to play now is a good strategy. And I think, this card gives us a difficulty in 8, and we either address that difficulty in 7 or 5, or we get that card off the board in 6. And usually, one of those 3 options is viable, right, against a half-strong corner. Not against other starter types, right? And you'd have to do this whole breakdown for other starter types to get priority lists elsewhere, which we may do over time. But against a half-strong starter, I think this is a very reasonable priority list. Safety, strong side corner, adjacent corner. Can we play an adjacent corner, meaning in 7, that's facing the strong side of it? Center setup move, just get rid of it, capture. Now we have a whole new game, right? They capture back. We're dealing with different numbers. We've gotten rid of this one that was a problem. We can move on to a new set of problems. Now, are these problems easy to face? I mean, this doesn't look super comfortable to me or anything, but it is a whole new set of problems. And because they're new card, they don't actually have recaptures on. Maybe we can do something like here. Now, maybe we can't because this combo sitting somewhere in the air is scary, but maybe we can just stick something in 5, grab that card, and move on with our lives, right? So say this. I'm not calculating this deeply, but it's not at all obvious what blue should do. They have nothing natural for 7. Their only capture in 3, we can combo back. Not there. Oops. We can combo back. We could also, even if we didn't have the combo, this would be safe. And in fact, our whole board is safe. Let's have the AI make a move. What do you got? All right, they take some safety. Sure. Makes sense. We don't really have safety in reply. This might be uncomfortable. Yeah, I kind of think we have to go, which card to do it with? Here? Okay, AI is stupid. But the line I was thinking was they capture and we have a tie. But the AI went stupid. This AI switches so much from being smart to being stupid. It makes moves, and I'm like, wow, didn't see that. That was smart. And then it makes other moves like, yeah, see, that's a better move. We have to go here to tie. No, that doesn't tie. No, we lost. I missed that I had set up the same for them in 4, or they had set up the same in 4. So, okay, I'm screwing this up. My evaluations are terrible right now. 3, 2, 6, 7, 6 may have been the wrong card to put in 5, but we can see how, like, something in 5 is setting up tricky problems for them. Yeah, let's make the AI play this one. All right, it wants to go there again. This time it didn't set up 4. And we could, for instance, play safely in 3. We get them. No, we don't. What did I walk into? Oh, they have a plus wall in 2. Jeez, I can't see anything. My brain has gone. Okay, so maybe here it all doesn't come together, but you can see why it would in other circumstances. What a terrible set of horrible miscalculations to end on. But I wanted to introduce this way of thinking because I don't think it's all that useful in game, but I think it's a framework where you can be like, okay, I didn't know how to respond to this starter. Let's just look at that position. Say, I got in trouble against this starter. Let's just look at this position, think through the options. I have a scoring system I can use and have to direct me. And the scoring system not only kind of gives a score to each move, but we could look at like, okay, what's a natural next move? How does the score change, right? We saw moves in 3 look bad, but they look a lot worse once we think about them replying in 6, right? And so, and we just don't have the recap, so moves in 3 are terrible by this system. But we have a way with this, I think, to kind of say, you don't like have to ask a better player or, check anything. You have a way to start thinking through stuff. And once you do think through even just one position, like this one position, like I think we've just given a really good kind of plan of action against half strong corners, right? And maybe you still get in trouble next turn, like you play a move like this and they block 8, and like there aren't that many ties here, right? We still have to find some good moves. Though in this position, it's because our hand's really in trouble, which is to say, like anything with a 4 facing up is susceptible to combos. Anything with a 7 facing up is susceptible to combos. That leaves us with like 1 capturing card, and it's needed for both 4 and 5, so it's hard to find a spot for. You can see why the game's still tricky, but it should be known. We do have at least 1 tie here, and I think in this position we had more than 1 tie. And it's like, it's, one of these moves, right? It's one of the most natural moves to make. And if you, get this position and you have 2 moves to check, you find the better one, you're not going to lose this game. So, yeah, I think it's got to be here, right? Here just walks into a same. Let's play another game with the AI, see if this one I can calculate slightly better. All right. It's still just so hard for us to play anywhere. So we're gonna not think too hard. In 5, they combo us. In 6, they combo us. But in 2, they do not. All right. We got ourselves a tie. This was a very tough hand to play. And so I guess my point is just, this gives a framework where someone, some industrious person, could kind of lay out each standard starter type. Half strong corner, full weak corner, full strong corner, standard defensive side. Something where like the classic example is like 6-3, 7-2, and 2 with 5-4, 7-4 ready to recapture in 1 or 3. Something like that. The defensive side, some kind of center drop, and just run through the possibilities, which you can do much faster than this if you're not talking it out and explaining your system and just babbling endlessly. and come up with a plan of action against each. And you don't really want more than three options against each because almost always you'll have at least one of the top three options. Here, we had two setup options and then a bailout option, right? Something that just gets rid of the problem thing. And that's probably kind of something like what you want. You have the moves that work if they set something up or if something goes right, the move to look for first. Um, and then you have the move that's just like, okay, barring all else, this is fine, and some sense of what needs to be going right for it. And you have a pretty good action for how a plan for how to meet starters. Pretty good. So I hope this is useful to someone. It's a weird way of thinking about it. I just wanted to test this idea I had, but actually, when looking at this game, which as I said was the most recent game with half strong corner starter, so I was just using a random example. And Midas' hand sucks. This is a really annoying position to save. Just no right power is really hard to deal with. Um, but it actually, I think, offers moves that are better than what were played in the game. I think like it offers a better, more coherent plan. And it gives a sense of how to get there in a useful way. And I didn't cherry pick the game, it was just the first one I found. It is a difficult hand to save, so it's a good test of whether the thinking works in a difficult situation. And I think it gives a pretty clear idea of what to do against half strong corners. And this might not be groundbreaking to anyone. It might be like, of course, you set up against it if you can. But I think the idea of just getting rid of the card if you can't set up against it by going in 6 is not that common a plan. And also, I think people go in 5 much more than they go in 7. And this suggests, and maybe it's wrong, but I think it's right, that people should be looking for 7 before 5. That 7 is kind of top of the priority list, then 5, then 6. And other moves only so far as they create a challenge. This doesn't deal with some complex scenarios. Like, for instance, if we didn't have 8, and the only ways we can take in 6 pretend like this was our only capture in 6, and they have, in this case, multiple ways to combo that back. In fact, almost their whole hand does. I would just treat that not as half safe, half unsafe, but as fully safe. I think that would probably be the better understanding of that kind of move, right? That, like, if we think about it as half safe, we're going to be led astray because we cannot actually touch it, and that is a serious problem. So there's definitely stuff you could do to like advance or level up the thinking that are going to be hard to do quite as algorithmically, but as a good triple triad player, you could certainly figure out how you want to adapt the thinking. But I kind of think most players, like, obviously we're human and our thinking varies moment to moment, but most players kind of do have a here's what they check first and here's where they look first. But we don't do it very consistently. So if we have 3 options we like, one day we look at them in the order 1, 2, 3. The next day we look 2, 3, 1. And depending on which way we look, we're going to end up on different moves. And thinking more systematically can be very useful. And just really trying to give an organized program of thinking here and a way to reach that organized program. And I think Faces Theory, at least in this game, did remarkably well, right? Like, it says 3 is horrendous, and 3 is horrendous. It says 1 is pretty sketchy, and 1 is pretty sketchy. It says 2 and 4 have some potential, but our hand really isn't doing it there. And 2 and 4 probably just about tie, but really uncomfortably in a lot of ways. It says 8 is not a particularly worse square than kind of 1, 2, or 4. 8 is fully in consideration with those moves. If 8 hits some safety, then 8 is just as appealing as those moves. And I think that's right. And then lastly, 7, 5, 6 is the priority list against a starter like this offers. You don't need to go further down the list than that because you will usually find a move that's one of those 3 that's reasonable. And yeah, that gives you something to do. We could write out a program like, okay, I couldn't because I can't program, but you could write out like a set of guidelines for different starter types of where to look first and what to look for. And I think for lots of players, that would be genuinely helpful.